Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's speaker night for March 2022. Couple of announcements to kick us off. We do have a competition in a couple of weeks. This is March 24th, and it's going to be all about national parks. So it's an open theme. So it can be wildlife, portrait, nature shot, water. The only constraint is that it must have been taken within the physical boundaries of one of the 63 defined national parks. So it's not just any National Park Service site. It must be one of the 63 national parks defined by Congress. And that is coming up on March 24th. And we don't have any new folks to talk about tonight. Just as a reminder, hi, I'm John. I'm the president of the club. And for tonight, does anybody have any announcements that they may have for the club at large? Any upcoming shows? Anybody making $1 million by selling a photo? Yeah, Nikki, you're one to laugh with all those award-winning photos there in your background, girl.
Thanks, John.
All right. Well, with that, I'll introduce tonight's speaker. So tonight, talking about his favorite photographs and the stories behind them, is a lifelong resident of Virginia and the cities of Richmond and Charlottesville. His passion for photography began in 1970, and for 52 years, he has pursued this commitment to capturing images from the natural world in Virginia and 20 other states across the nation. His carefully crafted landscape photographs have won local and national awards and competitions, including the International Grand Prize of Kodak's newspaper competition, Kinza. His photographs have been exhibited in numerous individual and group shows, and his landscape and wildlife images are currently represented in several Virginia galleries and shops, as well as outdoor arts and craft shows. In 2014, he published his first photography book, Natural Virginia, a coffee table-sized book, 10 by 17. It features natural Virginia panoramic color landscape and wildlife photographs from throughout the state, celebrating its natural beauty and the need for its preservation. He's now working on his second Virginia book, focusing on the importance of the state's national, state, and local national public lands, or natural public lands. Tonight, talking about his favorite photographs and the stories behind them, Mr. Ben Greenberg.
Thank you, John. Hello, everybody. Good evening. I really am pleased to have the opportunity to talk about my photographs. I mean, after all, what photographer doesn't like discussing his or her photographs, right? I'm sure you, when you all do the same thing, please invite me because I'd like to hear how other people do it. I have probably close to 100 photographs that I could be talking about on my PowerPoint presentation, but I'll try to maintain some self-control and try not to keep you all past 11 o'clock. I mean, not 9 o'clock or earlier. I would like to share a couple of shameless marketing promotions or however you want to describe them, plugs. I do have two websites. One is Ben at bengreenberg.com. And that's, I'm sorry, I just gave you my email address, but remember that because it's easy to remember. If you're interested in receiving information from me, I send out information 3 or 4 times a year. It includes an image or two and classes I'm teaching or shows I'll be in and various other things. And I can add you to my email list at any time. And like I said, it's Ben at bengreenberg.com. But my two websites are easy enough, at least in one case to remember. My regular website, which now has 900 photographs on it, and that's thanks to the pandemic. I had about a month or 6 weeks where I had nothing else to do, and so I started adding photographs and almost doubled on my website. And that website is bengreenberg.com, www.bengreenberg.com. And I have the photographs identified by location, or in a few cases category. I added a new wildlife section because in the last so many years, I've been doing increasingly shooting wildlife and just having such a blast with it. You know, when I shoot landscapes, which I've done for all my life, landscapes don't move on me. So the challenge of shooting wildlife is something that I've really enjoyed working on. Working with long lenses and heavy lenses is another challenge. And I'll tell you about a few of those photographs that occurred. And despite my efforts of learning how to use that equipment. And I also have a website for my book that John described, Natural Virginia. And that website, someone already had naturalvirginia.com, so I had to change it a little bit. So I have a website, naturalvirginiabook.com. And it has about 30 of the photographs, a lot of information about it. And you can even make arrangements to purchase it through that website. It's also available in all the major bookstores and Amazon and Barnes and Noble and so forth. So it's a book that's not inexpensive, but then it's $59.95. But then rarely are books of that size with 122 panoramic photographs. Unfortunately, I couldn't get it any less expensive than that, despite UVA Press's efforts to try to get me to price it at $49.95. And I could have lost a lot of money that way, but I tried not to do that, needless to say. But I also do teach some classes and do other things that try to help make my photography a little less little less problematic for the family budget, I like to say. I've been selling photographs or taking photographs or doing typical commercial things for probably of those 52 years, probably over 40 of them. And in 1998, I spent 2.5 weeks photographing the coast of Maine. And I decided that's what I want to do for the rest of my photography life. And shortly thereafter, I stopped photographing weddings and other things and just concentrated solely on landscapes. And now, of course, I added wildlife to those. And I just love doing it. What I'd also like to share with you is a few things about qualities of good photographs. And I hope you'll see those qualities in mine tonight. I've judged a lot of competitions over the years, whether it be individual camera clubs or state competitions or various other ways of judging opportunities to judge photographs. And there are certain things I always look for. And one of those things is simplicity. I like people who can organize their photographs in a way where the message is simple, it's direct, and it's not convoluted. It's not difficult to know what the photographer wanted to achieve. So I like clear and unambiguous subject matter. I like wonderful light that enhances the subject. And for that reason, I typically am, like probably most of you, shoot a lot of photographs very early in the day, sometimes starting before it's even there's any light available. And of course, at the end of the day. And then I spend most of my middle of the day traveling to new locations. I think that another quality is good timing when the shutter's snapped. And of course, that's huge when it comes to wildlife. And I know I don't have to explain that to you. Those darn animals keep moving on you. I like sharp images and with a lot of depth of field, especially in landscapes. But I also know in shooting wildlife that doesn't always occur. And you have to sacrifice something, and depth of field may be often exactly what you're going to have to sacrifice to get that exposure triangle just right. I think composition is probably one of the most important things that is typically most problematic with photographs that are taken. I have put together quite a library of photography books over the years. And I love looking at good photographs because if there's anything that'll teach you something about composition, it's great photography. And composition is the thing that's, I think, one of the things that's most difficult to master. And I've worked real hard at it. And I'm not saying I've mastered it, but I have improved a lot over the years, and I'm still working at it. And I've mentioned the exposure triangle and how important that selection is. Also, I think it's really important to note that photograph, when you're taking a photograph, to know what should be included and what should not be included. Too many times I see things that have no business being in a photograph, and they really distract and are problematic for what the photographer is trying to achieve. So it's just as important to figure out what not to have in the photograph as it is to identify what should be in the photograph. Now, I'm talking too much about that. Let me see if I can bring up my PowerPoint presentation and share some photographs and some stories behind those photographs. And some of those stories are really kind of interesting. Some are a little bit more than interesting. But you know, when you photograph as long as I have, then that's not uncommon. All right, let's see if I can get this PowerPoint into a slideshow. Well, let's see. Let's try it this way. There we go. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. It wasn't on the first page. And I just slightly revised this a few days ago, so a couple of days ago. So you're seeing the newest version of it. And let's go to my first photograph under what I refer to as Natural Virginia Images. Even though my book, Natural Virginia, only included panoramas, some of those panoramas were from standard photographs that I then cropped. After I bought a panoramic camera and I started seeing panoramic photographs, and I not only saw them out in nature, but I started seeing panoramic photographs in a lot of my old photographs. I had never thought about shooting a panoramic photograph. And so that's what happened. And I started finding new panoramas. And this is the photograph that you saw behind me in my picture. It's of a great blue heron on the James River in Richmond. It was shot at a condition that was much darker than what you see here. I actually shot this photograph before the sun came up, but the sun was coming up in that direction I was shooting. And so I was able to get enough light. But once I saw that heron there and knowing that he wasn't going to stick around too long, I knew I had to start shooting. And I was shooting film that I never used before or since. It was an 800 speed slide film for immediate format camera. I was shooting Pentax 67 cameras, which produced a 2 1/4 by 2 3/4 inch slide. And I got 21 photographs from my camera. And I shot a whole roll on this heron who kept walking back and forth across that ledge. He was looking for breakfast and he was fishing and he wouldn't stop moving. And I knew I was in trouble because the conditions weren't that bright. And I knew I needed to use a faster shutter speed, but even with the 800 speed film, I couldn't use a fast enough shutter speed to give me any guarantees. And because I was shooting film, you know, I wish I had been shooting digitally back then. And this was in the late 90s. But I knew that I couldn't do that obviously yet. And I realized that I was just going to have to shoot and pray that I was going to get a sharp picture. I knew I could get the surrounding area sharp, but to get that heron sharp, which is so critical, that was a question. And so I shot my 21 pictures, and that's the only roll of film I had that high speed. I usually shot Fuji Chrome or Velvia or Provia. Like those films a lot, the slide films. But in this case, it was a color negative film with an 800 speed. So I took it to the lab, and the next day I picked it up, the pictures, and I got 21 prints. And I looked at every picture, and every picture, the scene's beautiful, and the heron is fuzzy. Someone may want to mute themselves. And so all the pictures I kept looking at beautiful scenery and a heron that was fuzzy until I got to the very last picture. And I swear to God, that is the truth. And if you look very closely at this heron, you'll see his tail is moving and one leg is moving so much you can't even see it, or hardly. But everything else in his body is tack sharp, especially his neck, his head, his beak, and so forth, and the other leg. And so I was so fortunate because I had someone who was with me at the time shooting, and she didn't get it. She didn't get the heron sharp, I can promise you. And I was just lucky. And sometimes the harder I work, the luckier I get. And you'll see a lot of examples of that in my presentation tonight, because it happens. But if you're not there working hard, don't have much of a chance of getting lucky. And remember that old photography phrase, F8 and be there. This is a photograph I shot at Chincoteague Bay on the Eastern Shore. I was staying in a bed and breakfast. I walked down into the second floor balcony, and at sunset, and mind you, I'd been out shooting earlier in the day, but I didn't stay out and shoot. And I get to this balcony and I look out and I just can't believe what I'm seeing. I've been accused of using a red filter on this photograph probably 100 times, but I use no red filter. This is exactly what the scene looked like. And in addition to the color, which is just indescribable, I always like to remind people that if I could have just stood on that balcony and placed these docks where I wanted to place them, I could not have done a better job. And that's what makes the photograph to me even more remarkable. And I love the photograph, as you can imagine. I've also turned it into a panorama as well, cropping a little at the bottom and in some of the sky. And it works for it quite well that way. This is a picture which I've always loved, and I've always enjoyed the story behind it, because I was in Shenandoah Valley with a couple of friends of mine. They live there. They live near Lexington. And they were showing me around. I knew I needed more pictures from the valley for my book. So this was shot in the year before my book was published. And they were taking me all over the valley, and I got a few pictures that day that I liked, but nothing that really knocked my socks off. Until we got not that far from their home. They were driving down this road next to a farm, and I looked to my right, and this is what I saw, except the foreground was a lot darker. And I yelled stop as loud as I could. And fortunately we stopped, because I then moved faster than I think I've ever moved, trying to grab a camera, a tripod, and set up and start shooting, because I knew this light was going to disappear, and it was going to disappear quickly. And it amazed me because, first of all, the sky. I have photographed for 52 years. I've never seen a sky look quite so differentiated with those rays of light. When the sun is below the horizon like that. I mean, so distinct. And then I've got this beautiful foreground with the cows. And I quickly noticed that the cows were moving. They were starting to move. They were throughout the foreground. And so I knew I had to shoot fast, and I couldn't shoot a fast enough shutter speed to stop the movement. So if you look closely, you'll see some movement in the cows. But what I did know I was going to have a problem with, and mind you, I do not shoot HDR. I've never shot HDR. And so I had to figure out what to do with bracketed exposures. When I was shooting slides like this, this is still with film, I was, no, I'm sorry, this was digital, I apologize. But I always used to bracket like crazy with slide film, and I'm sure if you shot slide film, you know why. When I was shooting this scene, I knew the exposure was going to be so difficult. I was bracketing like crazy. And when I got the photographs downloaded in my computer and started studying them, it was pretty obvious that I had some good sky pictures in some images, and I had some good foreground pictures in some images, but I didn't have both in the same image. And so this is the only time I believe I've actually done this exactly this way. I took it because I had such distinct lines separating the sky in the foreground. I was able to do this. I took the sky from one, and I took the foreground from the other, and I put them together into a picture that worked really well. I still had to lighten the foreground a little bit, but let me just tell you a little bit about those moving cows. I was focusing so hard on taking these pictures, I didn't pay as much of attention to the cows as I should have. And after about 5 minutes, every single one of those cows was on the other side of the front fence, right in front of me, because every one of those cows thought I brought dinner. And needless to say, they were wrong, and very disappointed, but I got my photograph, and I'm very pleased I did. This is a photograph that's also in my book that was cropped with the top of the picture into a panorama, and it works extremely well that way as well. but this was shot on Skyline Drive in Shenandoah National Park. Many of you probably know where Big Meadows is. Well, if you've been around the Big Meadows area in the middle of Shenandoah National Park, right along the drive, you may have noticed that there was just south of that port of Big Meadows. And I mean, when I say just south, maybe 100 yards down the road, there was a few parking spaces and a field and a tree in the middle of the field. Well, I discovered that tree, behind that tree, very early on, probably not long after I moved to Charlottesville. So it was the early 2000s. I discovered that behind that tree is where the sun would set. And so for the next 8 to 10 years, I spent a bunch of times at that field with that tree, trying to get a great sunset photograph. And I never did get one until finally, and I guess after about 8 years, I was spending several nights in Shenandoah National Park during fall. And I decided I was going to go back to that tree and see if I could try again. And I had a lot of wasted photographs of that tree. But I went back, and until the sun went down below the horizon, I shot let me just point out something else. I thought I was the only one who knew about this tree and sunset. Well, when I got there late that afternoon, there must have been at least a dozen other photographers with tripods. So I was obviously fooling myself when I thought I was the only one who knew about this tree. So I shot through the sunset like everybody else, got nothing worthwhile. And when the sun went down below the horizon, everybody packed up their camera equipment, put it in the car, and drove off, except for me. Because I know from my experience that sometimes the best color in the sky is not before sunset, it's not at sunset, it's sometimes 10, 15, 20 minutes after sunset. One time I was in state of Washington photographing the sunset at Rialto Beach, and I found out that far north, you could have a sunset that looks great 45 minutes or even close to an hour after sunset. So but fortunately in this case, I did not leave. I stuck around and I started taking pictures, but they weren't working very well. And I've always told people, stop shooting photographs with your camera on your tripod at your eye level, because you don't want everything shot at eye level. Sometimes that just doesn't work. Well, sometimes I don't listen to myself. And I wasn't listening to that thought when I was taking these pictures, because I was shooting at eye level and this lowest branch of the tree kept coming in the area where the reddish part of the sky was, and obstructed it so badly that it really did ruin the picture, until I finally realized what was happening. So I proceeded to lower my tripod as low as it would go, put in with the camera on top of it, got down on my knees and started shooting, and got this picture, which made all the difference in the world. And I still love this picture. The picture that's on the cover of my book that I referred to earlier, that picture I describe as my all-time favorite. Then I refer to this picture, especially in its panoramic version, as my new favorite. And I mentioned that I don't shoot HDR. I use other techniques to try to deal with those kinds of issues. But I do believe in taking panoramic photographs when it works by shooting multiple images and stitching them together. And this is one of those images where I shot probably 7 photographs overlapping at least 25%, sometimes more, because I can't take any chances about those things. And so I had about 7 pictures that I stitched together. And there's so much detail in this picture. And this is the first light coming from the east when the sun rose above the horizon. And you can see these wonderful shadows and how it skimmed the fall color and created this hazy look in the distance, and just gave me all the effects I was looking for when I arrived well before sunrise that morning. And if you want to know where I shot this, if you go to Afton Mountain and you go enter the Blue Ridge Parkway heading south, this is shot from the second overlook on the left. And there's no overlook on the right at that point. But the second overlook, and it's on the left. But you better bring a ladder, because there's a lot of stuff that's overgrown in the foreground now, and it's hard to get this clear view. I shoot a lot around Charlottesville, as you can imagine, and this is a good example. I was driving around Charlottesville and Albemarle County, and drove past this driveway, and I saw it, and I just was immediately taken by it. And so I quickly made a U-turn. I pulled my car into the start of the driveway, and I figured I better start shooting fast, because who knows when the people might be coming home and would like to know who's invading their territory, their land. And so I started shooting quickly. And I really just, I've always loved this picture. I love the depth. I love, photographs are two-dimensional. Anything you can do to enhance that third dimension of depth can really make a big difference. And not only did the path of the driveway make a difference, not only did the trees disappearing into the distance make a difference, but the white fence made a huge difference. And it's one of the reasons I love this picture. I don't shoot a lot of vertical pictures. I mean, I shoot some. I typically shoot a lot more horizontals, and which of course tend to work a lot better in panoramas. But I do have shot a couple of vertical panoramas that have worked as well. One of them in a great waterfall. But this photograph I've always loved. And several years later than that, I drove by that same place, and I suddenly realized that no one will ever get a picture like this again. And that's because whoever lived in that home, or who maybe purchased it and moved in, decided that old looking white fence doesn't really do the job anymore, and they took it down. And so it's probably still a nice picture, but without that white fence, I'll never think very highly of it. This is a rather unusual picture I shot in the Rivanna River in Charlottesville. One reason it's unusual is that is a leaf that got stuck between the rocks at the bottom right, and I did not put it there. I didn't do anything to it, but it captured light in such a way that it just makes such a difference. But I always have to explain to people, you can tell it's a long exposure by the way the water's flow movement is showing. But I have to explain to people why there is so much orange color reflecting in the water. Well, what happens in this case, and I'm not sure I even knew this before it happened, before I saw it and photographed it. And by the way, I have a wide angle panorama of a similar scene right in this area that looks just so wonderful. But what happened here is that across the river, the afternoon sun lights up the trees. And when the sun lights up the water and the trees reflect in the water, and the beautiful fall color reflects in the water, and you see it. But it only reflects in those places where the sun is hitting the water. And the places where the sun is not hitting the water, the sunlight, then you don't get the reflection, and you see the whiteness of the water and the natural color of the rocks. So it's something you don't see very often. And you have to keep your eyes open. You have to be in the right place at the right time. But in this case, the afternoon light on the Rivanna River did the job for me, and I've always loved these photographs showing that orange color. Oh gosh, so I lose track of the time, when I did things, because when you've been shooting photographs for 52 years, it's hard to remember some of these things. But about a half a dozen, maybe 6 to 8 years ago, somewhere in that range, I decided I was going to photograph the most beautiful magnolia blossom I could find. And the interesting part about it is that in my neighborhood, there probably are 3 magnolia trees that are at least 80 feet tall. And when you have a tall, huge, old magnolia tree, you get a lot of magnolia blossoms, and they always occur in early to mid-June. So that's the timing. And that year, I decided I was going to find the most magnificent magnolia blossom. And when I came upon this magnolia blossom that day, I immediately was attracted to it. First of all, it had no direct sunlight on it, which was important to me. It had beautiful leaves around it, and it had this partially open blossom that just had a translucence to it. The lightness of it, the brightness of it, it was just so perfect. It's sometimes, when you're photographing something that's white, it can be a real challenge getting that whiteness to look exactly the way it needs to look. Well, this because it was in soft shade, what just came about looking so naturally and so perfectly. So I started photographing it. Now, one thing I learned with magnolia blossoms is, they don't look pretty for very long. They may be starting to open in the morning. By the end of the day, they'll be brown and be starting to drop leaves. It's amazing how fast it works. And so I'm shooting this magnolia blossom, and I actually realized, although it was moving so slowly, I couldn't see it move and open. The magnolia blossom was actually opening as I was photographing it. And so I shot a series. And of the series, this is the one I like the most. I just did. I can't explain it. Now, I don't always like to put things in the middle, but I didn't think there was any other way to do it. And I darkened the outside of it so that all the eyes are drawn to the leaves and to the magnolia blossom. I hope you like it as much as I do. This is a photograph that I shot in a huge snowstorm that dropped about 10 inches of snow in about 3 or 4 hours. So you can imagine how much snow was coming down. I don't like photographing in the cold. I'm not a big cold weather person, but if there's snow, I get interested in photography, because if I'm going to shoot in the winter, I want snow. If I don't have snow, then I started sometimes getting interested in shooting black and white photographs, because in the winter, that's the way most photographs look the best, unless you get great skies or what have you. But in this case, I went out during the early part of the snowstorm, but it had already dropped a lot of snow. And I shoot this, I set up my camera on my tripod across a field on Pantops Mountain right here in Charlottesville, actually it's in Albemarle County, just outside of Charlottesville, just east of Charlottesville. And I shot these trees, and the snow was coming down like crazy. And it was coming down so well that I actually got 4 wonderful images that afternoon. But this is the image that intrigued me the most, because it came out looking like a pen and ink drawing. And in that way, it was so different than anything I had ever done before. And when people look at it, they don't realize I shot this photograph in color. I processed this photograph in color, and I printed it in color. I know you look at this and say, how is that possible? Well, that snowstorm was so intense that it took out all the color, all of it, and reduced it to this. And this has become one of my favorite photographs and one of my best sellers as well. There's another interesting part to the story. I had photographed these trees at another time in the fall in fog and got a really nice picture. So in my book, every pair of pages that you open it up to, you usually see a photograph in the bottom and the information about the photograph on the page above. Well, this is these 2 images of these trees are the only 2 images that face each other in the book, because they were the same trees and the same scene, except different conditions. Well, I decided after that I needed to photograph these trees more often, see what other things I could shoot it with, and to see what else I can get, because I've done that before in some other scenes. I thought this would be great. So one day, a beautiful day, it was great conditions. The sky was gorgeous. There were beautiful clouds, wonderful conditions. I thought it'd be nice to go out in those trees, to the trees, and photograph them again, get the same picture. And when I got there, I realized that I will never, ever shoot another photograph of these trees, because without the fog, and that was pretty intense fog, and without the snowstorm, you can see past these trees buildings everywhere. And there's no way you can tell that in this picture, except for if you look very carefully, you'll see some slightly grayed out buildings in the background, but can't make them out very well. But therefore, I have never shot these trees in any other way since. And I've been disappointed. I wish I could remove the buildings, but I don't do that kind of photography. This is a picture I shot at UVA. I went to UVA, my brother went to UVA, and both of my sons did. So UVA is a place I've loved photographing over the years. My website has 55 photographs on the grounds of UVA. And this is a picture I shot in 1982. I remember it distinctly. It was one of the few pictures in my book. I turned it into a panorama that was shot with a 35mm camera. I shot in 82. I was shooting 35mm Nikons, and that was the year that I purchased my Pentax 67 equipment, and later that year switched to shooting with medium format for the next 25 years, actually. And so I was out on the lawn at UVA photographing, and there was beautiful color, as you can see, in the trees and on the ground. It was a really nice morning, and I just knew I was going to get some nice pictures, and I did. And at one point, I had my camera on my tripod, and I looked to my left, and I saw this, and I saw that light on that window, and I thought to myself, I've never seen anything quite like this before, and I just knew I had to get a good picture of it. And thank God I did. But let me tell you, most people assume this is the sun reflecting from behind me, reflecting on that window and bouncing back at me. That's not what it is. I am thankful that the person who was living in this home, and by the way, later than that, not long after, I found out that the person who lives in this pavilion at UVA on the lawn is Larry Sabato, who's a famous person dealing with the political world. He's on TV all the time, and this is his home. The top professors can live on the pavilions on the lawn, and there are 10 of them. And in this case, he had the back window uncovered, had the front window uncovered, and if you would stand on the perfect spot at the perfect time, or on a fall morning, that sun will come up and shine right through the pavilion and create this wonderful effect. And talk about being lucky. Absolutely. I've never seen an image like this from any other photographer. I don't think anybody else has ever gotten it before. And I am so proud to have this photograph. Although interesting enough, most people look at it, they don't know really what they're seeing, and it hasn't sold like a lot of my other photographs. So I'll have to figure out some way to change that. And I have a lot of photographs in Virginia, as you can imagine, and some I'll talk a lot about. In this one, I'll just briefly say, drive past Falling Spring Falls or Falling Waterfalls. It's sometimes called both, on Route 220, about 10 miles north of Covington in the western part of the state. And if you drive through there on a fall day when it's cold and chilly and there's a misty rain falling, you're going to get this kind of effect. And if you get there without too much brush blocking your view from the overlook, you can get this great photograph, which is situated about 50 feet from where you park your car. So it doesn't take a great deal of effort unless you've got things that are blocking your view. This photograph was taken about, I'd say about 15 years ago. And this is a huge waterfall. It's right now, it's about 62 feet. At one time, Thomas Jefferson reported this waterfall was 200 feet tall. And I couldn't figure out why in the world Thomas Jefferson, who was so exacting, could have declared this waterfall at 200 feet when now it's been measured at 62 feet. And I found out later that there was a diversion of the river that was coming from a different place, and the waterfall that was at that time existed was actually on more than 3 times as tall as the current waterfall. But when they diverted it, it changed the whole situation. And I'm not sure exactly why or the conditions, but it changed everything and made it into a much smaller waterfall. Also, let me just say, you can't legally go down below the waterfall. There are signs everywhere that tell you not to. And there are people who break that rule, and they can get fined and be in big trouble. And it really disgusts me when people show photographs of this waterfall from below the waterfall, because that's the only way they can get it. And no one should be doing that. This is Little Stony Creek in Pembroke, Virginia. It's downriver from the Cascades waterfall, which is fantastic. And I love capturing moving water. And in this case, the only way I caught it was by standing on a bridge that crossed the river. And fortunately, you can't, no one else was around, because when people walk across that bridge, it vibrates and you're not going to get a sharp picture. So if you go there and go across this bridge, waiting to make sure no one's moving, and then capture this with the time exposure that you need. It's beautiful in the fall too, and I've shot it in the fall. This was also shot with a 35mm camera, because it's the only thing I had with me that day when I was visiting a friend at Coles Point. And I'm walking around at sunset, and I see this sunset happening. I had no tripod, and so I sat on the ground. I tried to create a tripod with my legs, And I was very careful and I shot this picture and I couldn't believe how sharp it came out. And I just love the wonderful effect that was created in the placement, the location, the composition and everything. And this also comes out working quite well as a panorama. I like to go searching for possible pictures. You never know what you can find. And one day I was driving through Standardsville, and by the way, I have to apologize. I think Standardsville has two ends. Does anybody out there know whether that's right? I need to look it up. I think I misspelled it. But I was driving
No,
through.
I think you're right. It's just one end.
Oh, I did it right. Okay, well,
Yeah,
I had
you
got
got
it
it
mixed
right.
up. I think at one time I used two ends and I thought that was right. And so now, so then I got confused. So thank you. I'm glad I got this right.
Welcome.
I appreciate it. I like to spell things correctly. I like to identify things correctly. Well, I was driving through Standardsville and on the main drag, and I saw this pond and I got intrigued by it because, first of all, this pond had mostly open area behind it, which meant anything that's going on in the sky would reflect in the pond. It was beautifully shaped the way it is. And then I took out my compass and checked it. And guess what? The sun rises behind the pond. So I knew this pond could lead to some really nice photographs. And so I went to this pond at sunrise at least 3 times and got a bunch of great pictures. And so you got to keep your eyes open, keep your compass with you. And it's amazing what you can find, and make some notes so you can come back and find it again. If you've ever been to Grayson Highlands State Park, you'll know what a beautiful place it is. This is in Southwest Virginia in Grayson County. It follows, I think the Appalachian Trail is close by. It's near Mount Rogers. And it has a place called Clyburn Ridge, which is gorgeous, rock formations and the like, great place to hike. But one of the things I did not know was that in the first week in June, excuse me, when the rhododendron is in full bloom, that they have rhododendron bushes there about 15 feet tall. And I didn't know that they were blooming at the very time that I went to, excuse me again, Grayson Highlands State Park. So I took a hike. I must have hiked at least 2 miles that morning. And I came upon these bushes. And like I said, they must have been 15 feet tall. They had already started dropping the petals and they were beautiful. This path that right through them. And I just had a blast shooting a rhododendron that morning. I got 4 photographs that morning for my portfolio. And boy, it's hard to do better than that. So remember, rhododendron, first week in June. It works that way in places where rhododendron are growing elsewhere, like in North Carolina, right along the Blue Ridge, right near the Blue Ridge Parkway. There's some beautiful places with rhododendron. This picture is again something I came across at the Swift Creek Reservoir I'm sorry, it's south of Richmond. It's a place where I was living for a number of years. And I was shooting this scene, which was so wonderful. And I realized that boat was moving. Now, little details can make all the difference in the world with a great photograph. I hope I don't have to say, when saying that, I hope that doesn't surprise you, because I think little details can make all the difference in the world. But look very carefully at this picture. Do you see a little light coming through a window of the boat? Well, the boat was moving. It was turning from the wind. And I had to time my photograph at the perfect time when I could see the light through that window, because for me, that made a huge difference in the quality of the photograph. Despite all the incredible light, the incredible colors, the incredible formation of the cloud, and the placement of the boat. But I needed to get that light coming through the windows. So now you know how picky I am when as a photographer. And if you're the pickier you are, I'll bet you the better the photographer you are. Since I usually photograph early in the day and late in the day, this is a picture that always surprises me, because I went to the Middle Peninsula area of Virginia toward Tidewater, and I was looking for the Dragon Run, which is a river down there that the Nature Conservancy has been protecting for a number of years. And this river is a river that people canoe a lot. You can probably see why. It's covered with trees on both sides. And as you can see, the trees just kind of encapsulate this river in just an amazing way. And what I found out was that the light that gets down to the river only really occurs best in the middle of the day, because that's the only time the sun's high enough to actually get down through the trees and light up the river. And fortunately, I came upon it late morning. I parked my car, walked under the bridge that I could have driven over, and set up my camera and tripod, at which time a person who was fishing very close by said, "You might want to hurry. There's a water moccasin over there," which by the way, I had not seen. And I shot pretty quickly. Despite my speed, I got a very sharp picture and I got the H out of there. So sometimes you just got to do it quick. If you have time, take your time, because it'll make the difference. But when you got to move, you got to move. Yeah, more important things are at stake. If you're like me, you've been fascinated watching the light come through clouds in the sky and light up places in the ground. But when you try to photograph these things, they hardly ever show up strongly. They really don't. I've done it any number of times, and the photographs never seem to work out, until one day when I was driving along Skyline Drive in the Augusta County area. And I came to an overlook and looked down into the Shenandoah Valley. And this is what I saw. And I just hoped and prayed I could get a photograph that would show up with the light rays being really strong and hitting the ground. And I'm so pleased that it worked out. I had to add just a little bit of contrast when I was processing, because it needed that. And I like the way that darkened some of the areas on the outside and really gave the light effect really a lot of strength. But it's the only picture I ever have with this kind of light effect that really worked like this well. I got this wonderful photograph from Natural Bridge. I've only been to Natural Bridge a couple times over the years. Of course, now it's a state park, as you know, although I shot this when it was not a state park. And I called the people who managed Natural Bridge at the time and tried to find out from them when's it, about the bridge, and how early can I get in there in the morning to photograph it and so forth. Because I knew we had good fall color at that time, so I thought I could get a good photograph. And the man said to me, in something I've rarely heard, he said, because of the mountains and because of the light, you really can't photograph it early because there's no light that gets down in there. It's all in the shade, and you're not going to get a good photograph. You have to wait till later in the morning. And I was really disappointed, but I figured, well, this man must know what he's talking about. And so I didn't go as early as I wanted to. And for that matter, I couldn't have gotten in there as early as I wanted to anyway. And I went later in the morning, and I got this beautiful scene with the fall color, and a picture that the likes of which I had been looking for. I also took the hike all the way to the end of the path, which is, I don't know, about a mile and a half or so. I'm not sure exactly how long, but there is a waterfall at the end of the path, but it's usually in sunlight by the time you get there. And, photographing a waterfall in sunlight is the kiss of death. So you got to get there really early or really late, and then photograph it in the shade, like you really should photograph all waterfalls in the shade. This is a photograph I'm pretty proud of. I heard there was going to be some snowfall this fall night. And so that next morning I decided I was going to drive up to the mountains and see if I can't get a picture with the snow and with the fall color. And as I'm driving on 64 going west of Charlottesville, I see this scene in the distance, and it was a good little ways. I also know I was on 64 and I was trying to figure out how to get this picture. Now, sometimes I'm going to tell you things that I shouldn't have done. And I'm asking you, please don't try to copy things I shouldn't have done. But in this case, I wanted this picture. And so I pulled over into an exit, left my car in the exit off the road, off of 64, but in the exit. I took my camera equipment, walked to the middle of 64, in between the lanes to the right and left, hiked up the hillside to back to the spot where I could get a good view of this, and got my picture. Now, what's really funny about this is that a good friend of mine who I've mentored in photography, and he was now selling photographs in Indiana. Good friend of mine was teaching at Old Dominion at the time, and he went to class. This was on a Saturday morning. He went to class on Monday morning, and he said a student walked up to him. This is in Old Dominion University in Tidewater. Okay, a student walked up to him and said, "I saw the funniest thing on Saturday morning. I was driving up to the mountains west of Charlottesville, and I saw a photographer in the middle of Interstate 64 photographing these mountains in the distance." Well, you can imagine I just about cracked up when he told me that. He just about cracked up when he found out it was me. So yeah, sometimes you get to be picked out in the crowd. In this case, I was the only one in the crowd. I love fog. I love to photograph in fog. I love to find the conditions in which can excite me with fog. So one morning when I was in Bath County, I woke up in the morning and I saw this fog outside. So I went to Lake Mumah where I had scouted for picture possibilities, and got to an overlook, tried to take some pictures, but the fog was so intense that I couldn't get a good picture. So I then drove down to the water level of the water. There's a road that goes around the lake, and I found this spot right as the fog was lifting, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing with the light, with the reflections, with this island in the middle of the lake, with all the conditions and the beautiful color. And I was so pleased I was there. If you want to get good pictures, check out the conditions, the weather conditions, and when it starts changing, you have opportunities to get great photographs. And I probably don't have to tell you that because I think you probably know. Let me just point out one other thing for you that you might be interested in. I'm going to ask a question, and if anybody has an answer to this, let me know. Come on, actually tell me, and everybody else. How many natural freshwater lakes are there in the state of Virginia? Natural freshwater lakes in the state of Virginia. Does anybody know the answer? The number and what they are?
If I recall correctly, there's one. I thought it was over by the Dismal.
You thought it was over by what?
Over by the Intracoastal Waterway. I can't remember which one it was, but I may be thinking north.
Not exactly, but you're in. You got the general neighborhood, I guess, of one. But anybody else? Okay, well, there are two. Everything else in Virginia is man-made by damming or stopping the water flow of a river or what have you, and creating lakes and ponds and what have you. There are only two. One is Lake Drummond in the middle of the Great Dismal Swamp in southeastern Virginia. So that's not too far from the Intercoastal Waterway. Lake Drummond, and it's a really beautiful area to photograph. You might be interested in sometime. And the other is, oh gosh, I'm going to forget the name. You know, when you get to be 74 years old, you can't remember names sometimes. I'm sorry, Mountain Lake. Mountain Lake, which is where some of the movie Dirty Dancing was filmed. Natural lake, I'm sorry, Mountain Lake is a natural lake, but unfortunately, it also has a problem. Sometimes it drains and loses most or almost all of its water. And I've never been able to get a great picture of it because that's been the case for the last 15 years or so. And so I haven't been able to get a picture. I wanted one for my book. But Mountain Lake is the other one, and everything else is man-made in Virginia. So that's a little quiz you can use on people, and not a lot of people know the answer to that question. Hungry Mother State Park is in Southwest Virginia. And this picture was taken from the top of the mountain overlooking Hungry Mother State Park, but looking in the other direction. And in the other direction is a place called Rich Valley. This is a valley. This was shot in the spring. You know, it's amazing sometimes in the spring how beautiful the colors can be. But what makes this picture interesting for me is that I shot it in 40 to 50 mile per hour gale winds on top of a mountain. Now you could drive to that place, park your car, walk about 25 feet, and you get this view. But try getting this view and getting a good picture when it's the wind's blowing 40 to 50 miles per hour. I took my hat off and put it in the car. I knew that was going to be blown away. And I put my camera on my tripod, and I've developed techniques to help hold the camera and tripod steady under such conditions. And I'm so pleased that it worked in this case, because I thought this picture looked really beautiful. And I've shot it in the fall too, but something about spring color, it creates such interesting variations. If you've spent any time in Richmond, you know the James River flows to Richmond. The James River is the same river where I shot the picture of the great blue heron in the morning, and got all the beautiful blue conditions. Well, this is at dusk from the south side of the river on the looking toward the city, obviously. And this is a photograph that I shot again using the conditions of shooting 7 or 8 photographs, vertical photographs that I stitched together and created this wonderful, wonderful photograph. And when you're stitching these things together, you got to shoot these photographs quickly, because the light in the sky can change at this time of the day or evening quickly. So you got to be able to keep a sky very consistent in its color. And that's one of the challenges of shooting a stitched image. And this was something I did quite a few years ago, probably at least 15 years ago. I've shot national parks all over the place in the 21 states that I have photographed. Still got a lot of national parks I haven't photographed before, but this is one I love a lot. One of the images is this Shenandoah National Park. You know, it's Virginia's the national park that we have, although we have other places that are part of the National Park Service. So what John was saying earlier about the 63 national parks, we have places in Virginia that are part of the National Park Service, but are not one of the 63. For example, you probably all have been to Great Falls and photographed there, one of my favorite places in the entire country to photograph. Great Falls is in the National Park Service, but it's not considered to be one of the national parks. But this was a photograph I took trying to figure out how to describe the location. Location's about 2 or 3 miles on Skyline Drive, 2 or 3 miles north of Big Meadows. Excuse me. And I was hiking up to Hawksbill Mountain, which is the highest point in Shenandoah National Park. And I saw the sunset coming faster than I thought. And I decided I wanted to go get to a place where I could really photograph the sunset and get something special. And so I hiked back down to my car, drove like a almost bat out of hell, try to get to a place, and I came to this overlook, and there's a place where you could put a few cars, and I grabbed my camera, and I didn't have time to put it on the tripod. I didn't have time to reload. I had 10 pictures in my medium format camera, and I handheld it, and I shot 10 pictures with these 2 trees and the sun setting, and a few of those 10 without the 2 trees and the sun going a little further below, and you can see part of the sun disappearing in the other picture. But I love this one with the 2 trees, and I've seen those trees many times since, and they've really deteriorated a lot. And it's really been disappointing to see them, but that's what happens in these natural conditions. We photograph, things change. But I've always loved this photograph, so much so that I put it on the cover of my brochure. Also in Shenandoah National Park, I heard that there were yellow lady slippers along this path in the northern part of the park. And I decided to see if I could find them. I got some tips from some folks, but a lot of people don't like to tell people where these things are, because there are people who actually are stupid enough to go and try to dig them up and replant them. Well, these things die when you dig them up. They can't be replanted, but people aren't smart enough to know that, and they kill yellow lady slippers and other beautiful things when they try to replant them. So I was hiking on this trail. I must have hiked at least 2 to 3 miles, still hadn't found them. I was told it would take a while to see them. Well, I got to this fork I swear to God, fork in the trail. And if I was pretty sure that if I continued to hike the way I was supposed to, I had to turn right. But there was a place on the left, a trail. And before I turned right to really continue my hike, I looked to the left, and thank God I did, because that's where I found the yellow lady slippers, and had a wonderful time photographing them, as you can imagine. They're so beautiful. And when I bought my panoramic camera in 2004, I believe, it was right before I went to the Great Smoky Mountains and the Great Smoky Mountains National Park to go take some photographs. Now, you should never take a new camera that you've never used before, especially one as strange as a panoramic camera, on a trip where your photographs were going to be important. But I took it with me, and I was around Gatlinburg, and I was looking for the Roaring Fork, which is the name of this river. And I was on the road, and I found this parking space beside a not very tall hillside. So I parked my car, took my camera equipment, hiked over the hillside, and this is what I saw. And I was so excited, as you can imagine. The only thing that was unexciting was that the rhododendron bushes were not in bloom at the time. Boy, wouldn't that have been special? But I saw this beautiful scene with flowing water, and it was just so perfect for a panorama. I decided I would take my very first panoramic picture with this camera, and I did. And let me tell you, this camera is not easy to use, and I screwed up more than a few panoramic pictures over the years before I got rid of it. But this one was so perfect. And you look at the amazing depth of field. Look at the diagonal of the water composition. That really excited me. Look at the flow of the water with a long time exposure. By the way, this was not the brightest area you've ever seen. There were trees and everything blocking the light, and I had to use about a 45-second exposure to get this picture. And so that was quite a challenge. And I took a bunch of bracketed exposures just to be safe, and it came out as far better than I ever thought it would. But remember, first panoramic picture I'd ever taken. I mentioned this earlier about Olympic National Park at Rialto Beach, and how you're so far north. I didn't realize that sunset can take an hour. While we get sunsets, if we do get 20 or 25 minutes, we've got a long sunset. And I'm hiking on the beach with my long telephoto zoom lens. I didn't have my wide angle that I shoot all my pictures like this with. Didn't have it. I couldn't believe I left it in the car, or in the RV that I was actually renting. And I'm hiking up the beach, and I see the sunset happening. I can't believe it. And the car was way too far for me to go hiking back to get the equipment. And so what did I do? I took out my phone. That's right, folks. This is an iPhone photograph. And it works pretty damn well. I have actually had someone with better processing skills than I make a 20 by 30 print of it. And it's not bad at all. Of course, I'm pretty critical, so it's not perfect, but it's not bad at all, and it's worth including in this. So if you got camera equipment, it doesn't do any good if you don't have it with you. I usually take everything with me, and I should have had it with me when I took this picture. And by the way, has anybody ever seen green color in a sunset picture before? Because I haven't. The colors in this picture were just amazing. This is also in Shenandoah National Park, and I'll be very quick to say, I saw these leaves rotating in the water from the movement of the water. I took a 1-second exposure, hoping, and again, I'm shooting film, took a 1-second exposure, hoping I could get this effect, processed it, and couldn't believe that it came out exactly the way I wanted, with the waterfall right behind it. And this is a hog camp branch of the Rose River, very popular place to photograph in Shenandoah National Park. It's not far from Skyline. which is a great place to stay. And I love the movement of those leaves. I showed a picture with some rays in the sky. While I was in Yellowstone National Park, I was photographing across a river where it had some wonderful places that like the kind that you'd expect to find in Yellowstone. I was getting some nice pictures. And then this has happened to me several times in my life, but I turned around. I advise you, whenever you're looking at taking pictures in one direction, turn around. You'd be amazed what the light could be doing in the opposite direction. And this is what I saw. The sun was below the horizon. It was going through those trees, and the trees were causing this wonderful light effect. So turn around. One of the most iconic places to photograph in the entire country at Oxbow Bend at Grand Teton National Park. I timed my trip for hopefully the aspens would be in beautiful fall color, that the mountaintops would be snow covered, and have beautiful conditions. When I got to the Tetons after being at Yellowstone, I drove south to go to the Tetons. I saw the aspens, and aspens many aspens and Tetons are not yellow in the fall like the way other aspens are in many other places I photographed, and in some of the places at the Tetons, but they are orange like these. And I just was so surprised to see that. But when I got there, there was no snow on the peaks, and I was so disappointed. Well, 2 days later, guess what happened? It rained in Jackson Hole, rained in the valley, and when it rains in the valley, another 6,000 feet up, it's going to snow, and that's what happened to the peaks. And then on a Sunday morning, I drove to Oxbow Bend. I was really excited about going there and trying to see the conditions and getting these iconic type of photographs. Although with a little twist, a Ben Greenberg twist. And I get there, and I thought I was there really early, and I'll bet there were 75 photographers already there. It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I was lucky to find a place to get some good shooting done, and I did. And to see the fog also, in low-lying fog in the pictures, although I wish it had been lighter in color, the dark gray, although it does contrast well with the snow, but it was really interesting. And so I shot a lot of pictures that morning, and this is obviously one of my favorites, especially as a panorama.
Ben, question from the chat. What month did you go to the Teton?
This was in mid-September. Actually, maybe the third week in September, because I went to Yellowstone first. And so that's a great time for the peak color. Happy to tell people those things. You know, sometimes I've timed things hopefully that for the perfect color. I once spent 12 days in Vermont and New Hampshire at supposedly peak fall color time, and it was the worst fall color in the history of New England that year. So you just never know for sure. On that whole trip, I got 7 photographs from New Hampshire that I liked, and nothing from Vermont. Fortunately, I went over to Maine and got some great photographs along the coast of Maine while I was waiting for the color to come up. So it wasn't a total loss. You've all probably seen Ansel Adams' famous picture of the Snake River overlook. And I stood in the spot where Ansel Adams once stood, but that's not the first time I've ever done that. One time I almost ran into him the year before he died in California. I came within probably 20 minutes of seeing him on the same trail I was on. But in any case, I went to this place in the Tetons in Jackson Hole, and as you can probably tell, when Ansel Adams photographed the Snake River, the curve of the Snake River here, he didn't have trees, those pines that had grown so tall to help block the way. So he had a much clearer view. Of course, he shot those pictures about 60 years ago. So there's a good reason why he got a better view. But I got it when the fall color was there, as you can see. And so I still fell in love with the picture and with the lighting effect in the distance as well. Acadia National Park is a beautiful place, especially along the coast, obviously. And it's they have birch trees in a number of places, but they're not always easy to find. Well, I was driving on through Acadia. There's a one-way road, and they've got it set up so you can park your car at any point along that road going one way, and you could go hiking. Well, one day I thought I saw something interesting in the woods. And so I parked my car, got my camera equipment. Fortunately, I brought it all with me that time. And I hiked into the woods and I found this grove of birch trees. And I've had many a person tell me they've been to Acadia National Park and they never saw a grove of birch trees like this. And I then had to tell them, well, the first thing you got to do is park your car and go hiking. And that's how I got lucky enough to find these birch trees and get this wonderful photograph. And interestingly enough, I have sold this photograph many times, but there are at least 3 or 4 occasions in which I sold it to men who bought it for their wives. It just so happened that birch trees are probably one of the most common trees in Russia. And these men were married to Russian women and who loved birch trees and loved pictures of birch trees. And when they see birch trees, they get tears in their eyes because it reminds them of their homeland. And so I've been very fortunate in seeing people who love birch trees, who loved my photograph. Glacier National Park is an amazing place. I could show you tons of pictures. We don't have the time for me to show you tons of pictures, but this is one of my favorites. This is St. Mary Lake. There's a famous little island you can see in the lake, and I was there early one morning, just at the right time so that I could see the sun rising behind me and lighting up the cliffs and making all the difference in the world in the photograph. Timing is everything, especially early in the morning and late in the day. This is also in Glacier National Park, but in a place that most people never see because it is much further south of the places that people normally go to at Glacier National Park. And this lake is called Two Medicine Lake. And we got there when it was still dark. And when the light came up, I saw this gorgeous scene with these beautiful stones in the water. I made sure I used my polarizing filter so I could reduce or remove any reflection I could get at that part where the rocks were, and so I could see through the water and then get this beautiful scene in the background. And it makes a wonderful panorama, but without the rocks, it's just not nearly as strong. And I love it. I love the whole picture together.
Yeah.
And I've been to 20 other states. I'm sorry.
Yeah, real quick before we go away from it. Back on your Acadia picture with the birch. When were you up in Acadia?
I'm sorry, what?
When were you in Acadia?
Oh, this was a long time ago.
Remember what? Well, obviously it was.
Yeah, it was. This was, I think, in my 1998 trip.
And was it spring, summer?
Oh, it was in August.
Yeah.
And Acadia is a great place to go in August. Much better than Virginia.
Cool.
And so I'm going to go quickly through a few other state pictures. Then I'm looking forward to showing you some panoramic pictures. This is at Page, Arizona, the Horseshoe Bend of the Colorado River. And, I think little things make a huge difference in a picture. Look down in the river. What do you see? A boat going around Horseshoe Bend. And by the way, I'm on the edge of this cliff, and 2 feet further, and I would have been going down about a 2,000-foot drop. So please be careful. I try my best. The only time I ever hurt myself photographing was when I got on about an 8 or 10-foot boulder at Rocky Mountain National Park with my tripod and my camera. And while I'm up there taking pictures and I needed to get a higher vantage point, I slipped and fell off the boulder and hit hard ground, really hard ground. And I still have the scars on my leg to show for it. But fortunately, while I got some scrapes and bruises, I didn't break anything, thank God. Because Rocky Mountain National Park is a great place to visit too. California, oh boy, you could spend your life in California and never finish your photography. amazing. I've been on the coast. I've been to Yosemite. I've been to the LA area. It's just amazing. What can I tell you? This is Pfeiffer Beach State Park. You have to drive about 2 miles on a gravel road to get down to this beach from the main road, which is the road that goes along the coast. And you see this incredible place, and you see the rocky formations on the right with the openings where you could actually see through. And I've seen pictures of people shot with the sun right through the holes. But you notice I was there in the morning. I wanted to time it with a great wave hitting those rocks and creating a wonderful effect. And I got exactly what I wanted. This is at Yosemite. This is Vernal Falls, which is one of the bigger falls at Yosemite. And this was in early June. By the way, I went to Yosemite in early June thinking I could go to the Highlands and actually get to Mono Lake and do all kinds of things in the upper areas. And that year, there was so much snow in the winter that there was still 10 feet of snow in these places I wanted to go. So needless to say, I had to stick to Yosemite in the lower areas. And you don't have this much water going over Vernal Falls, but because of all that snow, that's what happened here. And I did something I should never have done, and I please ask you never to do it. I actually climbed. There was this huge level boulder. It's not just a boulder, but it was just off the trail, and you could walk over it and get a much better view of Vernal Falls. The problem is with Vernal Falls flowing like that, everything was wet, and those rocks were slippery. And I got on my hands and knees and crawled across that boulder till I got to a point where I could take this picture. And trust me, it wasn't worth it because it was that dangerous. I could have been, it could easily have been the end of time of my photography days. It was just a really stupid thing to do. And by the way, there was no color to be had, so I thought this would be a great black and white picture. This is Pacific Grove, which is a beautiful area. You've all heard of all the wonderful places in the Pacific Grove area. And this was after the sun went down, and I was still seeing this beautiful place that I've been photographing. And I decided to take a very long exposure and see what the water would do with all the rocky coast. And this was probably a 1 minute exposure. And I'm shooting with film, so again, I have to just experiment. And I took several bracketed exposures, and I got something very similar to what I was hoping I would get. Don't you just love shooting digitally and you know exactly what you get after you get it? That's just so amazing to me after all the years of experimentation that I had to deal with. This is also not far away from the last few pictures I showed you. This is along Big Sur. This is the Julia Pfeiffer Burns State Park. Must be a person who's related to Julia Pfeiffer. And this is one of 2 places in the entire state of California that has a waterfall that flows into the Pacific Ocean. And you can fortunately go to this park, park your car, walk about a trail about 150 yards, and come upon this spot to be able to photograph this picture. Colorado is a pretty exciting place to go. And a friend and I went there for, I think, 8 days, if I remember right. And we wanted to go to so many different places. One place that we wanted to go was up in the mountains, and you really got to know what you're doing. And so we hired a guide early one morning. We met him about 3 o'clock in the morning, and he said he'd take us to a place that we could never find. Well, not only could we never find it, without him, we would never have wanted to, because I felt like he was taking our lives and putting our lives in danger. We drove on this car up a gravel road across 3 mountains and up to this mountaintop, which was 14,000 feet. Amazing trip. And mind you, this gravel road was 1 car wide. Okay. we get up there and the sun was just starting to come over the horizon of the mountain behind us and starting to light up this area. And I just couldn't believe, with the wildflowers along this little pond and the cliff in the background with the warm sun lighting it up, and then getting the great reflection in the water with shooting at the right angle. And it just turned out to be such a wonderful picture. Shot a lot of pictures up on that mountaintop, as you can imagine. But let me tell you what happened. On the way down, we were probably about 15 or 20 minutes on our way down, way too far to ever reverse course. All of a sudden, we ran almost into a car coming up. And I'm not kidding you when I tell you that gravel road was one car wide. Well, our guy was experienced enough that he started backing up. And when he started backing up on that road, I started closing my eyes. And he started backing up, found a spot where there was an indentation into the mountain where he could pull air vehicle, smart guy he was, pull their vehicle closer to the mountain. And the other car, which fortunately, and I say fortunately because I mean it, was a very small car. And this car had to go past us on the outside of the road where there was a drop of, I can't tell you how many thousands and thousands of feet. And he had to come within inches of us to be able to stay on that road and get past us. And he did. And then we had to drive down, but I just kept my eyes closed until we got on firmer ground, because that was an experience I will, as you can tell, never forget. But I got this picture. Also in Colorado, Great Sand Dunes National Monument, which has now become a national park. But when the year I went there, which was about 2005, no, I'm sorry, 2004 or 2006 perhaps, but in any case, right around then. Well, then it was a national monument. And my friend and I, my friend went with me. He's really heck of a photographer. And we had a hard time getting ourselves in good enough condition to be in the elevations we were going to go to. And try hiking up huge, and I do mean some of the tallest sand dunes in the country, when you're not in great condition, and also when you're like me and you have asthma, and when you have a 40-pound camera pack on your back, and you're trying to hike up these dunes. And I get up to the dunes and get up to a certain point, and I can't go any further. I can't breathe. And fortunately, at that spot, and I got some other pictures too, but at that spot, I got my favorite picture of Great Sand Dunes. And that is this picture. And look very carefully at the tracks along the top edge of that sand dune. And look how every single foot, assuming it's a foot or something, was right in front of the one behind it. Now, what creature does that? What creature makes those tracks in a single file right along the edge of the sand dune? I don't know. Does anyone have any ideas? Because I'd love to find out. Okay, it's got you fooled too. If anybody ever comes up with an idea, please let me know, because I would love to know what animal had made those tracks. You can understand why. And look at the beautiful formation here of the dunes and just shadow patterns, the lines, everything.
Someone on chat suggested a rabbit.
Pardon me?
Someone on the chat suggested a rabbit, maybe.
Really?
I mean, I don't know. That's a big rabbit, but.
But rabbits also have, but don't rabbits have two legs beside each other?
I don't know.
I'm just.
Don't know.
Who knows? Maybe that's right. I'll have to talk to someone who knows a lot more about animals than I do. And this person who came up with that idea may well. And moving right along, and I'm going to try to move along because time is wasting. If you've never been to Colorado Springs, you've never been to the Garden of the Gods. And this was my second trip to Colorado Springs to see the Garden of the Gods. in my first trip back in the other Colorado trip I've been describing, I went to Colorado Springs. I wanted to photograph the Garden of the Gods, and the one day I had to photograph them, it rained all day, and I couldn't go get a picture. So I took another trip to Rocky Mountain National Park in that area. I went to Denver and drove south to Colorado Springs early one morning during the night, actually, and got to Colorado Springs in time to take some pictures at Garden of the Gods. And let me tell you, it is magnificent. I mean, you're just looking at this, it's just hard to imagine what it's like in real life. And there are so many possibilities to take great photographs. It's just something about photographing places like this that really just changes you. It sure changed me. I'm only going to show one picture from Maine on this trip back in 1998, but I drove south along the coast during the early hours of the morning when there was no sunlight yet, nothing. And I got to a place called Lincolnville Cove. The only light source on the cove where these boats were, the only light source was one street light. And I mean this, one street light that cast a low level of light on these boats. And I just couldn't resist but take this picture. And I took this photograph, and it had to be at least a minute exposure because I'm shooting film, and it's such a long exposure. And I want you to look real carefully now. Look how everything is tack sharp. That means that for 1 minute, there was absolutely no wind and no movement of the boats. And again, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And I sure was lucky that morning because I love this photograph. And this is Portland Head Light. And I loved getting that light in the fog. I got there and it was foggy, and I was so happy. And my friend was upset because he didn't want to shoot in fog. And I thought to myself, why else would you be at a lighthouse? I mean, really, in a fog in the early morning. Oh well. Minnesota, guess what, folks? This is the headwaters of the Mississippi River, and it's at Itasca State Park. There's a lake to the left, and once the water flows past the rocks, it starts to form the Mississippi, and you can walk across the Mississippi by walking across those rocks. So you can say you once walked across the Mississippi River. North Carolina is a beautiful state to photograph. I've been in the mountains, and I love them because some of them are taller than Virginia. Most of them are taller than Virginia's mountains. But I love Outer Banks. I love the Kitty Hawk Dunes. And I went there early one morning before sunrise because I wanted to photograph. And when I got there, the gate was closed, and I had to leave my car there and hike in. And that was a good little hike, let me tell you. But I got there just in time for the first light to create this wonderful picture. And look at those shadow patterns. That was obviously the sunlight when it just barely got above the horizon. Wyabald is a mountaintop in southwest North Carolina, 3 miles west of Franklin, North Carolina. You can drive your car to the top of Wyabald. And when I drove up there the first time, I saw the potential for great photography under the right conditions. That was not the right time. And so I used to go down that pass that way quite frequently to go visit my son and his family in Georgia. So I went by Wyabald a number of times, and over several years, I spent 5 nights overnight in the area, and so I could go to the top of Wyabald early in the morning. And the first 4 times were worthless. And the 5th time I got there after 2 days of rain and a high pressure system moving through the next morning, starting to clear out the sky, leaving all the valleys in fog. And I got this amazing photograph. And again, 5 times I spent overnights to try to go to the top of that mountain under the right conditions. And it's hard to find the right conditions like this, as you can imagine. If you have never been to Roan Mountain, Go there in the spring, you see blaze azalea like this. You see rhododendron everywhere. It's right along the Appalachian Trail. It's on the border of North Carolina and Tennessee, and it is beautiful. I heartily recommend go to Roan Mountain with the border of North Carolina and Tennessee. Although if you want to stay overnight, you may have to drive about 10 or 15 miles to find a place to stay, unless you can, which I don't do very often. And then there's the Pacific Northwest. Washington and Oregon are amazing. This is the Columbia River Gorge, along the Oregon side, there are many waterfalls. But this is the Columbia River Gorge, and to the left is the state of Washington. To the right is the state of Oregon. And that is a place you can spend a lot of wonderful time getting some incredible pictures. And this time I was there before sunrise. So actually I spent the night at this overlook with the permission of the park ranger, who took pity on me when I told him I drove over 2,000 miles to get to this spot, and all the campgrounds were full, and that was the truth. And Oregon has these wonderful sea rocks and the sea stacks everywhere. You probably heard some of them are quite famous. And I captured this photograph over a long exposure because I love the flow of the surf and around the rocks and through the rocks, and got this wonderful, beautiful color. And there's an area called the Palouse in the southeastern part of the state of Washington. There's a state park called Steptoe Butte State Park, which is actually on a mountain. I mean, seriously. And there's a road that goes around the mountain all the way up the mountain. And you drive up that mountain and you see this beautiful Palouse area. And by the way, that's not sand you're seeing. That's wheat in first morning light. And in the spring, it turns emerald green as it's growing. And later in the summer, which is when I was there, the wheat starts to turn color, and you get these beautiful images. And it's first light and last light, you get these wonderful sculpted looks. And when you can find a red barn in it, you got something. Remember that name, the Palouse. And South Dakota is one of my favorite places, especially because my wife's family is from there, and she's from there. And this is Sioux Falls is the capital of South Dakota, southeastern tip of South Dakota. And this is the Big Sioux River as it flows through Sioux Falls. And I actually got this picture at noon one day when the light was just magical for somehow. The water flow was so low, it gave me this wonderful look. I photographed this same place with a lot of water, and it's so boring. But look at the flow of the water over the rocks, and look what happened at low levels of water. So if you want low water, do it in the fall. If you want a lot of water, go in the spring. And that works for waterfalls too. And sometimes I even find rainbows up in the Black Hills of South Dakota, which is at the other end of the state. And I go visit. I love to photograph wildflowers. And I went to Texas at one of the great wildflower seasons in the hill country. And I've only got a couple pictures to show you, but it was an amazing year, as you can tell. That's something about bluebonnets. Are they gorgeous or what? And Utah, what's more amazing than Utah? And this, I've got a little story I have to tell about this. And then after I do that, I'm going to go show you a few wildlife photographs before I finish, because I've got some neat ones. I went to Canyonlands National Park to photograph. I was only able to be there one morning. I mean, can you imagine Canyonlands, as huge as it is, being there one morning? But that morning, I was not going to miss Mesa Arch. This is a place that's become iconic, and I wanted to see Mesa Arch because I've seen this type of picture before. What happens is you've got these red rocks, you've got the sun going over the horizon. It hits the red rocks on the other side of the mountain here, and it kicks up the light on the underside of Mesa Arch. And whoever saw that first, spread the word. And let me tell you, now you go and there are photographers standing in line wanting to take the picture. Well, I got there well before sunrise, and I mean well before sunrise, and there was already a line of people. But fortunately, there was enough space for me to get in position. and everybody was too close to the arch. So I had to get my widest angle lens so I could get the sun in the picture and most of the arch. But these people, I don't know why these people were so close. It just was ridiculous, but they were. And so I stood there waiting for the sun to get to the horizon. Well, a few minutes before this happened, all of a sudden some guy shows up, and I'm not kidding you. This is an absolute truth. Some guy shows up with his camera on his tripod, walks in front of this row of photographers who have been waiting there for who knows how long, walks in front of him and stops in front of me and sets up his camera and his tripod and waits to take a picture. And I'm standing there dumbfounded. Never had this happen in my entire life. Could not believe it. And this is a scene I'll never have a chance to see again, probably. And so I stood there and for about 30 seconds. And I then said words I'll never forget that I said. And my words were, "You don't really think I'm going to let you do this to me, do you?" And the guy waited about 10, 15 seconds and proceeded to say, without looking at me, "Well, I thought it was worth a try." He proceeded to take his camera and his tripod and leave. And I got my picture. And 3 minutes after I got this picture, the sun went behind some clouds and there were no more pictures to be shot. But fortunately, at the horizon, there were no clouds and I was able to get the dream shot. I love photographing aspens in fall, and this is in Utah. And I asked someone where I could find aspens in fall with peak fall color. He said, drive out of the parking lot, make a left and drive 1 mile. I did that and I found this picture and many others as well. And these are cottonwood trees. We don't have cottonwood trees in the east, but they also look like the fall color of aspens. And they're always found along riverbeds, usually dry riverbeds in the fall. And they come up with this incredible color along a dry riverbed. And in this case, I was on top of a mountain looking down to the valley, and I found this scene in the valley that I shot from quite a distance away. I love West Virginia, but I'm gonna keep going and just say, I waited 3 hours for this picture for the sun to move around and give me some edge light on the mountain, and it made all the difference in the world in early spring. And the New River, Sandstone Falls. Look at the curve here. And it was a misty rain at the time I shot this picture, but I didn't mind because I got this picture. And the Gristmill and Glade Creek at Babcock State Park. You hit the right fall day and you will see something like this if you can imagine it. And I called every day to find out when it was going to be like this. And the ranger finally told me one day, "You better come now." So the next morning I woke up at 3 o'clock, drove 3.5 hours into West Virginia, and I was able to capture this and a lot more. And Dolly Sides is a fantastic area to photograph. If you can get there in the fall when the bogs turn crimson and the fog comes in, you can get some pictures like this too. But I was there so early, I walked into this area with fog, having left moisture everywhere. And when I walked out, I was dripping from head to toe, but I got my pictures. And these are a couple of new pictures I've shot. This was at Chincoteague. I've never seen a bad sunrise or sunset at Chincoteague, and this is one of my latest. And I love this picture. And this tree on Skyline Drive in Shenandoah National Park with the last light, which was a beautiful warm color that caused this tree to almost glow. And Fisherman Island, I got special permission to go photograph. It's a national wildlife refuge right at the tip of near Cape Charles and the eastern shore. And can you see the wind blowing the sand? I tried real hard to capture that, and I think I did. And back to Shenandoah National Park in fog. And I'm gonna show you a few wildlife pictures. Somebody was talking about a roseate spoonbill earlier. Well, this is my favorite picture of a roseate spoonbill, although I didn't intend to photograph him. What happened was I was photographing this tree at Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge. This tree had 5 egrets, snowy and great egrets, sitting on the branches. I was leaning against my RV, hand holding a 150 to 600 millimeter zoom lens, big and heavy. So I'm leaning against this RV, trying to hold it steady with a fast shutter speed. I'm photographing this tree, and what flew into my picture with this spoonbill. And I didn't have the camera set up to shoot rapid fire. I shot 3 pictures of the spoonbill, and this is the first and definitely the best, because the last 2 he was behind the branches, but I didn't care because I got this picture, and this is really what I was hoping to get, reaching for the branch. And have you ever seen a head of a bird any uglier than a roseate spoonbill to have those beautiful colors behind it? Isn't that amazing? Wow. And I love egrets, snowy and great egrets. And if you don't know the difference between how to tell the difference between a great egret and a snowy egret, I'll tell you that at the end of the presentation. There's a park in Fairfax County. You may have been there, Huntley Meadows Park. That is fantastic. And I've shot a lot there in the last couple of years. And look at this heron. He went fishing, and he didn't just capture this fish, he speared it. His beak is going through the fish. This is at Chincoteague, one of my favorite places to photograph. These are all great egrets. Oh, I might as well go ahead and tell you right now. Great egrets have orange beaks and black feet. Snowy egrets have black beaks and gold feet. Got that? I know it's confusing, but that's the case. And that's how you tell the difference. Great egrets also are slightly bigger, in my opinion. But I had a guy right beside me who was trying to photograph these guys, but he only had a 500 millimeter lens with him. And that was way too long to shoot this picture. And if you look real carefully, you'll also see a couple of mallards there. Well, one particularly stands out. Another one's in the grass. And don't you just love the way they're all looking in the same direction? That's what makes the picture, for the most part, for me. This great blue heron was at Rappahannock River Valley National Wildlife Refuge. Virginia has 14 national wildlife refuges, and about half of them you're going to have trouble actually being able to get in to photograph. They're protected in various ways. But this heron was standing on this log. I wanted to photograph him taking off. I had my camera on a monopod. I like to shoot with a monopod when I'm shooting wildlife many times. And I waited for about 40 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe even an hour. I lost count. And that guy was not moving. I was a good ways away from him using a long lens. And finally, I said, what the heck? I got a good picture just like this. And I shot my picture and I left. And when I left and I drove away, he was still standing there. And this is a heron that I was focusing on in the wetlands at Chincoteague. And I was focusing on him and I was waiting for him to take off. And he finally did. And I got a great panorama out of this too. But I love the way the water is flowing from his talons. And here is, remember, this is a snowy egret because he's got black beak and yellow feet. And I captured him at just the perfect spot in the composition, in my opinion. I just love the way I was able to get him coming up and into the diagonal and going right into the frame. And well, now this will be one of the most amazing pictures you'll probably ever see of sandhill cranes. I was in Florida. I was at the Circle B Bar Reserve. There are a lot of birds there. There are also some very big alligators there. There's one that was famous on TV for quite a while. He was about 20 feet long. But when I was there, I was photographing a heron on a log along I don't know if I'd call it a river or a creek or whatever, but a creek, let's say. And he was standing on there and I was photographing him, and some people started making some noise behind me. And I turned around and I saw this family of sandhill cranes coming down the path. They were taking an afternoon stroll. These 2 huge parents who are about 4 feet tall. You know, sandhill cranes are huge. They're 4 feet tall. And these 2 little furball babies walking with them. So they were moving slowly, of course. And the mama, and I'm pretty sure this is the mother, reaching down, tending to one of the babies, while the papa looks disinterested, but what I think he's doing is he's watching out for predators because predators love baby birds. I've even seen a snake climb a tree and grab a baby bird, if you can imagine that. So I think the father was watching out, and they were strolling down, and people were standing along the path, and I was within 3 feet of them as they walked past me, if you can imagine that. It was so cool. I'll never forget it. But I love to capture birds in flight at times, especially in beautiful scenes. And sometimes I'm photographing scenes like this one when they decide to enter my picture, as they did in this case, and I photographed them in my picture. Told you, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And this was before the sun came up.
Hey, Ben, real quick, a question from, what time of year were those Chincoteague wildlife,
I'm sorry, which ones?
the Chincoteague wildlife photos?
Oh, let's see. Oh, I can tell you pretty clearly. I'm usually there in the fall. Usually, I love Thanksgiving weekend. One of the reasons I love Thanksgiving weekend is because there is a road that goes around the huge lake at Chincoteague, and a lot of the birds are in those lakes, in that lake and around that lake. And on Thanksgiving weekend, they let you drive around that lake on that road any time of the day. Otherwise, other than Thanksgiving weekend, they only allow you to do it after 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's a huge advantage to be able to be around there anytime you want. And so that's why I frequently go Thanksgiving weekend. And I've done it a number of times. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. This eagle was in Oregon. I photographed him. I walked down the beach one day. I saw him on a tree. I took pictures of him, and then before I knew it, he took off, and I didn't get a good picture of him taking off, and I was upset. So I was determined to get this eagle again. So the next day, also in the afternoon, around the same time, I went down that beach again. And guess what? That eagle was back on the same tree. Birds do that a lot. And that eagle was on that tree, and I set my camera up on my monopod and I focused on him, and I waited and I waited. And would you believe, in about 20, 25 minutes, he took off and I got this picture. And I was so pleased, as you can imagine. You got to be willing to commit. This was also a Chincoteague. I love the fall and the fall color. And I had a 500 millimeter lens I was renting, a f4 lens, and I had it on my tripod in this great egret. Notice great egret, orange beak. Feet you can't see, but they're black. He was fishing along these reeds, and it was so beautiful. And I bet I took more pictures of this egret than any egret who ever lived. I bet I shot him for almost an hour, but I had such fun. And this is the one I decided I love the most. And the early morning light is so special. You've seen quite a few of my pictures with it. Well, this elk stood in early morning light, looked my way, and I got this photograph, and I just fell in love with it. And by the way, he is a powerful elk. He had an intruder who this elk had 9 mares with him, 9. And a male came in and wanted to try to get his way. And this guy made sure that the guy hightailed it out of there and saved his skin, because this guy wasn't messing around. At the Venice Rookery, if you ever go to Venice, there is a rookery on a little island very close to the shore where you can get pictures, especially in February. It's just amazing what you can get. And here I got a great blue heron feeding a baby, and this baby isn't so small, as you can see. Well, guess what? At this point in February, the great blue heron's babies were large, and you can see the beak of another one in the bush there, while the egrets were still building their nests. So it's just really fascinating how varied the different birds are at different times in terms of having their babies.
Ben, was
Yes.
your sandhill crane photo taken in February as well?
Yes, as a matter of fact, in Florida, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Um, I love ospreys. I love their nests, and I love to photograph ospreys. And I stood waiting and waiting and waiting for this osprey to come back to his nest. And when he finally came back, I was able to get this picture, and I'm really pleased with it. I don't like the vertical branch sticking up, but you've got to live with what you get. And I have photographed ospreys in many number of conditions. They make the largest nest. Their nests are even larger than the eagle nests. And by the way, they're the best fishermen around, definitely. Here I photographed at Huntley Meadows again, great blue heron who was landing. And I never got this before, I never saw it before. The way they land and how they'll use their talons to trail on the edge of the water. That way they know exactly where they are and how to finish their landing, I think. That's my best guess. And I was so pleased to get this and show this way. And of course, shooting with a very fast shutter speed to be able to get him so sharp. To resident eagles at Chincoteague. And this is Chincoteague National Wildlife Refuge, not the town of Chincoteague. And I saw him flying, and I've seen them flying together the last time I went to Chincoteague, but I only got pictures from behind that day. But in this case, they weren't flying together. And then they landed, they got on these trees and they posed. And I was more than happy to take a picture of them, showing them in their natural environment. And at Glacier National Park, they have amazing creatures, including mountain goats. And does this say mountain goat or what? I mean, look at the scene. I got really lucky on this, but there was a whole herd of mountain goats, and I wanted to single one out, and I like this the most. And Richmond used to have a rookery right on an island right in the middle of downtown Richmond. Well, a few years ago, they all left. It's hard to believe, but when I photographed this, there were 60 nests on that one island, and there were herons everywhere. And here I caught the heron with the stick in his mouth, bringing it back to the nest for his mate. Oh, by the way, I shouldn't tell you this, but I was standing on a railroad trestle, but there was enough space so that if a train came by, I wouldn't get hit. But that's the only way to get this picture. So don't do that. And this is in southern Florida, and it was obviously late in the day, and I couldn't believe this flock of ibis flew right by, and I was able to get this amazing picture. And I just love this photograph. And deer, people get deer pictures all the time. I never had a good deer picture, never, until I got this one. And there were 4 deer that ran into the woods at Prince William Forest Park. And 2 of them stopped, checked me out, wanted to figure out who this guy was and what was he doing. And I fortunately got this picture, and I can see all 4 eyes, which was amazing through all those leaves. This is an Anhinga state bird of Florida. He was drinking water, and I waited, and he pulled his head up, and the water trailed from his beak, and I got the picture. Much more interesting than him drinking. And Canada geese, very common. And sometimes you can get some neat pictures of them together right after they've landed. And this was also at Huntley Meadows. And this is an osprey at the Potomac Beach, which is along the Potomac River. And he was bringing his dinner to the beach where I photographed him eating it. And look at that. He was flying right at me. Bull moose and Grand Teton. I should just let you take a good look at this creature. And I was up on the hillside, and damn if he didn't climb that hillside not far from me, and I couldn't believe it because that was really a dangerous place to be. I thought I was in a safe spot, and then he decided to climb up. This is a cormorant. Cormorants get their wings wet when they go diving for food, and they come up and they have to spread their wings to dry them off. And they do this all the time, sometimes even standing in water. And just so happened he picked the spot right near where I photographed what did I just photograph? I'm sorry. Yeah, right. Right after I photographed this osprey. And so I turned 90 degrees, and there was this scene, and all these turns were on every post. I mean, how lucky can I get, right? And these were back at the Venice Rookery. They were still building their nests while we had big heron babies. And this guy had a branch in his mouth, has a branch in his mouth. I photographed him going out and coming back and bringing branches, at least a dozen times while I was there. And elks crossing the Yellowstone River. I just thought this was so cool. I was a long ways from them, so I was really pleased the photograph came out so well. And this heron was not shot with a 500mm lens. This heron was shot with my wide angle lens. He was about 6 feet from me drinking water. I was standing very still and trying to be inconspicuous. And all of a sudden, and I was prepared for this, fortunately, and he decides to take off. And I got this picture, and he was just a few feet from me, and I just can't believe it worked out so well, even to become a panorama with the water coming from his talons, and him just creating this wonderful effect with everything perfectly sharp. I'm so proud of this picture.
Do you happen to know what your settings were for that?
Not off the top of my head, but I'll tell you what someone has told me. A guy, good friend of mine, who is one of the best wildlife photographers possibly in the world. He used to live in Virginia. He just not long ago moved to Montana. He said, after I was talking to him about wildlife pictures and I was getting into it, he said, you can't shoot slower than a 1/1500th of a second, and sometimes you'll need a 2000th or more, but never shoot slower than a 1500th.
Wow, thanks.
Exactly. And let me tell you, I learned the hard way, because I got some pictures that didn't work and couldn't have worked. But look how sharp this is. Every hair is sharp. So, and again, wide angle lens, bison herd with a calf. And I got just a couple more. Let's see. Okay, it's time to finish up. So let me just tell you, this fox was running with his dinner in his mouth along a road that I was driving my RV. So I drove past him, stopped with my window open, and pulled up my camera and shot him running by me 4 different times. One time there were wildflowers he was running through, and I shot this picture. And I'm not kidding you. He was running. He wasn't posing, standing there with his dinner. He was running. And look at the hair on his body and how sharp that is. And I guarantee you that was definitely at least a 2000th of a second.
Is that springtime?
No, that was in middle. That was August.
Okay.
Of course, you realize Glacier National Park, with its elevation, you're going to have wildflowers later in the year. Not during our normal spring. I shot this picture because this great egret stuck his head way up high to see what was happening, and I shot it right then, because that made the picture. That little detail. And the Grayson, there are wild horses in 2 places in Virginia. Chincoteague, you all know about, and it's hard to find them, but you go to Chincoteague, you'll probably see them. And the other place is Grayson Highlands State Park, and you can walk right up to these creatures, but don't feed them, please. Some people do, and they really shouldn't. These are wild horses. And my last wildlife picture, I was at this Two Medicine Lake. I showed you a picture earlier. Right before I decided to walk away from the lake, I look out and I see this duck and babies swimming across the lake. Now, at the time, I didn't even know what kind of duck it was. I later was able to find out it was a common merganser, and there are several different kinds of merganser ducks. But what I did, I worked so hard to make sure I got a sharp picture and got it just right. And I was so proud of the picture. And later, after I finally had a chance to really look at it, it was only then that I saw the baby on the mother's back. I've seen pictures since of babies on mothers' backs, but I did not know I had that until later, because I was working so hard to make sure I get a great photograph in with the right settings. And it worked out so beautifully. And I just love this picture. And look at the mommy's beak, so close to the water, it's almost perfectly reflected. And that's all, folks.
Great. There was one more question that was up in chat that I talked about. is what lenses do you use? And,
What lenses do I use?
right.
I would love to have all prime lenses that are so perfect and so sharp, but I know that I need lenses that cover the range of things that I'm interested in. And so although I do own a macro lens that I don't use very much because I don't do much macro photography. I've bought some other things, but I'll shoot almost all my photographs with either my 24-70 zoom Nikon lens, is an f2.8. They've got I have the older version. The newer version only has one major difference, and that is it has an image stabilization feature. And I wish I had that, but on the other hand, the old lens is just as sharp as the new one, and so I use that a lot. That used to be my go-to lens for almost everything. And then I bought the 80-400 zoom lens Nikon, which is a fantastic lens. And the 80-400 is so sharp. They had an old 80-400 that I bought a long time ago used, and it wasn't sharp at all. And I finally got rid of it. And they came out finally after about 15 years. No, everybody kept waiting for a newer version. After about 15 years, they finally came out with the 80-400. It's not a fast lens, but it is so sharp. And I use it probably for half my photographs now. And at one time, I might have used it for 5%. And I do have a third lens that is an amazing lens. It's something that Canon would love to have made for themselves, but Nikon made it, and it's a 14-24 millimeter that is so sharp and so incredible. But the weird thing is, I figured I'd be shooting that with that lens a lot, and it was an expensive lens, as you can imagine. I thought I'd be shooting a lot with it. Well, the 14-24, I'll bet I haven't shot with it a dozen times in all the years I've owned it, and I've owned it for 15 years. It just doesn't. It's wider than I need. My 24-70 really does such a good job for me. It's so unusual for me to need to go wider than 24. And so I'm shocked. I've got a couple of really nice pictures with it, things I might not have been able to get otherwise, but it just doesn't happen all that often. So go figure. But those are the three lenses that I shoot almost exclusively with. And I'm not interested. I mean, I'd love to have a super long 500 or 600 with a telephoto extender to get up. Let's see, get a 500 millimeter lens and get a 1.4, and then you've got a 700 millimeter lens, or you get a 600 millimeter lens with a 1.4, and you got an 840. So it would be nice to do that, but those lenses are just so expensive, and you can't find a used one that fits my budget right now. So I mean, those lenses new cost anywhere from $10,000 to $12,000. Canon just came out with an 800 millimeter lens and a 1200 millimeter lens. The 800 millimeter costs $16,000. The 1200 millimeter lens costs $20,000. And so, well, that's out of my ballpark. Besides, I shoot Nikon, so I guess I don't have to worry about that. Any other questions?
I don't have a question, but I do have theory. Those animal tracks in Great Sand.
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear you.
I do have a theory for the animal tracks in Great Sand Dunes.
Okay.
I think it was a kangaroo rat.
I've heard of it, but I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, I think, according to the research real quick, the kangaroo rat can live its entire life in the dunes and never drink a drop of water.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you think it's possible they could move showing only single footprints along the way?
Yep. When you take a look at it, take a look, see if you agree. That may be the answer to the question, to your mystery.
Well, I will definitely do that. Kangaroo rat. Thank you. And thank you for the tip about the rabbit.
So the camera, the Nikon camera, which
You just cut out. I couldn't hear you.
so what camera are you using?
I have the first as I said, I started my life with with 35 millimeter Nikon equipment. The Nichromats at first. Later, I added a Nikon F3. Then in 1982, I started buying Pentax 67 cameras, medium format, shot 6x7 slides, 2¼ by 2¾ inches. 35 millimeter never satisfied me because I wanted to blow up big, and I wanted to have the capability to blow up big. And let's face it, 35 millimeter has its limitations. So I went medium format for 25 years. I shot weddings with it, portrait work, all kinds of things, as well as natural, conditions. And then in 2007, Nikon came out with their D700 digital camera. I decided I wanted to see how good it was. It was a 12.3 megapixel camera. And mind you, I had all this medium format equipment. So I borrowed the camera at the camera store that I frequent. I put let's see, I think I put the 14 to 24 on it. And then I took my Pentax 67 with a wide angle lens. I shot the same scenes with both, same scene, and then I processed them normally. I then started blowing up pictures, and I found out the digital camera produced pictures that were sharper, even though it was only 12 megapixels versus medium format. It was sharper. It had a wider tonal range, and anybody will tell you digital will capture wider tonal range than any of the slide photographs I was shooting before. And it had even though I was just shooting TIFFs, the white balance was just perfect. And I got so excited. And so I decided, my friend had been trying to tell me to switch for years, and I kept telling him that I can't afford to. And he said, "Are you kidding? Think of all the film and processing you're going to save." Because I went on one of my trips to let's see which one, to Arizona and Utah. I shot 3,500 pictures, and that was film that I had to buy and then process. And so, and I didn't process it myself. So that's like $3,500 or more. So I finally decided I had to go digital, and so I sold all my medium format and started collecting the Nikon cameras. And after I got the D700, the Nikon, I was able to buy a used D3X, which at the time new was like $8,000, and I was able to buy it used for either 5,700 or 4,700, and it was practically new, and it was in great condition. So I used my D700 and the D3X for a long time. And then when Nikon came out with the D800, I was interested, but I wasn't ready. And then they came out with the D810. So I bought two D810s, sold my D700. And then they came out with the D850. So I sold one of the D810s and I got a D850 because I just love the D850. So now I do almost all my shooting with the D810 and the D850. And I have a D3X that's still a fantastic camera, even though it costs new $8,000. I can't get more than $1,000 for it, if you can believe that. And I just refuse to part with it for $1,000. I don't know what I'm going to do with my D3X, but I used to carry all three cameras with me on my trips and on my shooting. And now because of the weight factor and because I found I'm getting a little older, I decided I typically only take my 810 and my 850 with me. And then I'll take the D3X, but I'll have it in another bag just because I'm trying to, reduce the weight. And the D3X is the heaviest of all the cameras I ever had. So I'm sorry, that was a little longer than I expected. That's the story of my camera equipment.
Well, what about your panoramic?
Oh, that's a good question.
That's a Fuji?
Pardon me?
Was that a Fuji?
Yes, a Fuji G617.
Yeah.
And the G617 had a fixed lens, while the GX617, I believe, is the one that has interchangeable lenses and has, I think, 3 different lenses you could put on it. But the G617 with one lens was like a normal lens, but the normal lens was so wide because of the nature of the camera that it created the ability to shoot, really wide. So I never felt a really great need to get the GX 617 because I didn't need those wide angle lenses.
Okay.
And it took incredibly sharp pictures, but it had a separate viewfinder. I was looking through. I've had a history of looking through the viewfinders and looking through the lenses of all when I take my pictures. And this camera, the G617, had a separate viewfinder above, and you had to somehow figure out what the viewfinder saw versus what the lens saw, and be able to accommodate that to make sure you got your best cropping and best composition. And let me tell you, that was not an easy thing to do. I don't feel like I ever mastered it. I did get some great pictures with it, like the one I showed you, but I don't feel like I ever mastered it. In fact, I lost some pictures because I didn't get those angles just right.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, this has been a real treat. I appreciate so many people hanging with me as I talked so much. I warned you about photographers loving to talk about the pictures, but I hope it was enjoyable and informative.
It was, and we definitely appreciate you coming out. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.